Your dinner plate looks the same as it always has. Chicken, a scoop of rice, some green beans. 3 or 4 bites in, though, you're done. Not full in the old sense, just done. The way a full meal used to feel. Except this was maybe a third of one. If you started a GLP-1 medication this year, that's not you doing anything wrong. It's the medication working exactly the way it's supposed to. Your appetite went down. What almost nobody adds up out loud. Your protein target didn't go down with it. It's still sitting on a plate that's now half the size. So the advice everyone hands you, eat more protein, drink more water, watch your bones, isn't wrong. It's just built for the appetite you had before, not the one you have now. There are 7 places that gap shows up in what you eat this week. How you spread your protein through the day, what order it hits your plate, and what's quietly triggering the nausea that makes all of it harder. The 7th one, the one about your bones, isn't the one you'd expect. Before any numbers, 2 facts belong in the same sentence here, not whichever one sounds scarier on its own. One widely cited figure says, close to 40% of the weight lost in a major semaglutide trial was lean mass, not fat. A newer study in Cell Reports Medicine looked at that same kind of data. It found that a chunk of what gets counted as lean mass is actually water and organ tissue, not muscle. Grip strength and physical function held up better than the scale numbers alone suggested. Both of those can be true at once. What doesn't change either way is the fix. Protein, at the right pace. Do that, and muscle has a far better chance of coming along for the ride instead of being lost with the fat. This matters for the same reason it always matters after 60. Muscle is what carries the groceries in from the car, what gets you back up off the floor, what keeps you steady on the stairs. Sarcopenia, the gradual muscle loss that comes with age on its own, already affects something like 1 in 3 adults over 60 before any medication enters the picture. So there's rarely a big reserve sitting in the bank to begin with. Most seniors starting one of these medications are doing it for a real reason: better blood sugar, real weight carried off a joint that was struggling. None of what follows is an argument against that. It's an argument for pairing it with the 7 things that keep the muscle in the room while the rest of the work gets done. None of the next 7 things involve a special GLP-1 shake, a branded protein blend, or a supplement stack sold next to the prescription. They're the food already in a normal kitchen, used in a slightly different order, and on a slightly different schedule than your old appetite would have allowed. The target didn't shrink. The plate did. Number 1. Spread your protein through the day instead of stacking it into meals that don't fit anymore. Here's something that trips people up in the first few weeks. You sit down to the exact dinner you'd have made a year ago, same protein, same portion you've always plated. You're done at the halfway mark, pushing the rest around, not because that food is wrong, just because you're full. That's not a discipline problem. It's the medication, slowing how fast your stomach empties and turning down a hunger signal that used to bring you back for seconds. The part nobody adjusts for you is that your protein target didn't shrink to match. A joint 2025 advisory from the American Society for Nutrition and 3 sister obesity and nutrition medicine groups puts the target at roughly 1.5 grams of protein for every kilogram you weigh each day. That's meant to give muscle the raw material it needs while the calories are down. For a 150-pound adult, that works out to somewhere around 100 grams a day, spread out rather than delivered in one sitting. But that's not the whole picture. Older adults need more protein packed into each individual bite to trigger muscle building, not just a bigger number by bedtime. The per-meal amount needed to flip that switch runs higher with age. Roughly 3 to 3.5 grams of a specific amino acid called leucine per sitting, compared to 2.5 to 3 grams in a younger adult. 3 smaller, denser hits beat 1 large meal you can't finish. Try 3 small assemblies through the day, instead of forcing 3 big plates. In the morning, 2 eggs scrambled with an ounce of shredded cheddar, about 3 minutes at the stove, comes to around 17 grams of protein. At midday, no stove needed. A cup of plain Greek yogurt stirred with 2 tablespoons of peanut butter runs about 25 grams. In the evening, half a cup of 2% cottage cheese with an ounce of walnuts, maybe a minute of prep, adds another 18. That's roughly 60 grams from 3 small bites alone, before a single regular meal gets counted. Hitting the number stops being about eating more. It's about eating denser, more often, in amounts your appetite can finish. Eggs, yogurt, and cottage cheese were doing this job long before these medications existed. Space the 3 bites 4 to 5 hours apart, rather than clustering them, so each one arrives while the last one has cleared, and rotate what's in them across the week, so it doesn't start feeling like the same meal 3 times a day. Where that protein lands on the plate matters just as much as how much of it there is. Number 2. Put the protein on your fork first, not last. When a plate holds less than it used to, the order you eat it in decides what gets finished. Most people eat the way they always have, working around the plate, a little of everything. They save the protein for the end, because that's just how the fork moves. On a smaller appetite, that habit means the fullness signal often lands before the protein does. What's left on the plate when you're done is exactly the part your muscles needed most. Here's why the order matters more now than it used to. Part of how these medications work is by slowing how fast food leaves your stomach and nudging the brain's fullness signal to arrive earlier than it once did. That's useful for the medication's job. It's a problem for yours. Earlier doesn't ask permission, and it doesn't care what's still sitting on the plate when it shows up. If the protein is the last thing you get to, it's also the thing most likely to get left behind when that signal lands. Flip the order instead. Eat the protein portion first, while there's still room for it. Let the vegetables and starch fill in whatever appetite is left over. At home, that can mean physically plating the protein by itself and starting there before anything else touches your fork. Or simply eating it first, even when everything's already on one plate together. At a restaurant or someone else's table, where you can't always control what's plated first, it means simply choosing your own first few bites rather than eating whatever's closest. If you're the one cooking for a spouse or grandkids too, this doesn't mean a separate meal for you. It just means you reach for your own protein first, while the rest of the table eats in whatever order it always has. Plenty of people over 60 grew up with a rule about finishing everything on the plate in whatever order it landed, and changing that habit can feel strange for the first week or two, even when you know the reason behind it. That discomfort tends to fade once the new order becomes the normal one, usually faster than people expect. It sounds almost too simple to be a fix, but it's the cheapest change on this list. It costs nothing, needs no shopping trip, and it protects the one nutrient a shrunken plate is most likely to shortchange. Number 3. Drink on a clock, not on thirst. Picture standing at the counter on a warm afternoon, a full glass of water sitting right there. You don't feel like reaching for it. Not stubbornness, just no thirst cue telling you to. That's worth paying attention to, because 2 things are stacking on top of each other here. Getting older is already linked to a weaker thirst response on its own. That's one reason dehydration creeps up on people well past 60, even without any medication involved. GLP-1 medications can blunt that signal further, on top of the appetite suppression. So the usual advice, drink when you're thirsty, stops being reliable exactly when you need it most. This isn't a minor comfort issue. Dehydration on its own can leave you dizzy, foggy, and more likely to lose your footing. That matters just as much for staying steady on your feet as the muscle itself does. It also tends to show up hardest on hot days, or on days when nausea or an upset stomach is already pulling fluid out of you. That's exactly when the thirst signal is least trustworthy. The fix isn't complicated. Attach water to clock time instead of to a feeling. A glass when you wake up. A glass with each of the small protein bites from earlier. A glass mid-afternoon, whether or not anything in your body is asking for it. One more with dinner. That's 5 or 6 glasses on the clock before the day is over, without ever needing to feel thirsty first. If your urine runs dark or you're feeling foggier than usual, treat that as your actual signal, not thirst. And if plain water feels like a chore to get through, a splash of lemon, a cup of herbal tea, or a broth-based soup still counts toward the same clock. There's no rule that it has to come from a glass. On hot days, or on days a stomach bug or a rough side effect afternoon has you running the bathroom more than usual, add an extra glass or two on top of the schedule, rather than waiting to see how you feel. By the time you feel it, you're often already behind. Coffee and tea can count toward the total too, in normal amounts. The old advice that caffeine cancels out hydration doesn't hold up well under real research. Still, it's worth making most of the day's glasses plain water rather than leaning on caffeine to hit the number. If you're also taking a water pill for blood pressure or for any other reason, the clock-based approach still applies. It's still worth mentioning to whichever doctor manages that prescription, since the right total for you might land a little differently than the general guidance here. That's a question for your next regular visit, not a reason to hold off starting the habit tonight. Number 4. Add fiber slowly and pair it with the water you just started drinking on schedule. Picture this. Someone hears "eat more fiber for constipation," adds a big bowl of bran cereal and a handful of chia seeds the same week. They end up more uncomfortable than before, not less. Fiber without water behind it doesn't soften anything. It just adds bulk to a gut that's already moving slower than it used to. Adults 65 and older on these medications tend to report constipation more than younger patients do, especially alongside insulin or certain diabetes pills. That's on top of a stomach that's already emptying more slowly by design. That's exactly the setup where fiber added too fast backfires. A stomach already easing into smaller meals doesn't need a sudden wall of bran on top of it. Build it up over 1 to 2 weeks instead of one day. Start with an extra half serving of vegetables or berries every few days, not a bran overhaul overnight. Pair every added gram with the water schedule from a moment ago. Fiber and water are doing this job together, or not at all. Cooked vegetables tend to sit easier than raw ones early on. Oats make a gentler start than a bran cereal. Prunes or pears, with the skin left on, do real work without needing much volume at all. If a day brings bloating or cramping instead of relief, that's your cue to pull back a step and hold there for a few more days before adding again. It's not a sign the whole approach is wrong. A short daily walk after a meal helps the gut along too, and it costs nothing extra on top of a schedule that's probably already fairly full. How fast any of this settles varies person to person, so give a new addition a full week before deciding it isn't working, rather than judging it off one uncomfortable afternoon. Get the pace and the water right together, and the two habits back each other up instead of one undoing the other. There's a second reason to go slow and gentle with what you add, and it has nothing to do with your gut. Number 5. Go easy on the fried and fatty stuff, not because it's forbidden, because it's the fastest way to feel sick. High-fat and fried food is one of the most common nausea triggers on these medications. The mechanism is straightforward once you know it. Your stomach is already emptying slower than it used to, and fat sits in a slow emptying stomach even longer. That's exactly the combination that turns a normal meal into an uncomfortable one. This one has real teeth for someone whose appetite is already small. A round of nausea after a heavy meal doesn't just cost you that meal. It can cost you the next one too, while your stomach settles. That's the last thing a smaller appetite can afford to lose, and it's a direct hit against the protein target from items 1 and 2 as well. Think about the difference between a plate of fried chicken with gravy and the same chicken grilled or baked with the skin off. Same protein, same satisfaction, a fraction of the fat load sitting in your stomach afterward. The same swap works for breakfast. Eggs scrambled in a dry pan instead of fried in butter. Yogurt instead of a heavy cream sauce on the side. This isn't about giving up flavor or eating bland food for the rest of your life. Herbs, citrus, and spice carry flavor without the fat load that slows things down. If you know a heavier meal is coming, whether it's a holiday dinner or just a craving, save it for whenever your appetite is at its best that day, rather than defaulting to it at dinner out of habit. Keep the portion modest rather than skipping the rest of the day to make room for it. Eating slowly helps here too. A stomach that's already emptying more slowly has less patience for being rushed, and the nausea that shows up from eating too fast can feel identical to the nausea that shows up from eating too much fat. The fix for each is different though. Eating out doesn't have to mean guessing. Asking for a sauce on the side, or trading a fried option for a grilled or baked one on the same menu, gets you most of the way there without turning dinner with family into a production. Getting the food itself right handles most of what a smaller plate can go wrong. What it can miss is the stuff a smaller plate simply doesn't have room for anymore. Number 6. Close the gaps a smaller plate leaves behind, especially vitamin B12 and calcium. Is it even safe to be on one of these long-term at my age? Is close to the most common question people ask once the weight starts moving. It's a fair one. Part of the honest answer is that eating less of everything, for months at a time, leaves less room for nutrients you're not thinking about day to day. Reported gaps in people on these medications include protein, calcium, iron, magnesium, potassium, and vitamin B12, tied directly to smaller meals and less variety in what actually gets eaten. One large study in obesity pillars, tracking over 461,000 adults newly prescribed one of these medications, found vitamin D came up short in roughly 1 in 13 people at 6 months, and closer to 1 in 7 by the 1-year mark. Numbers nobody sees on a blood test they never asked for. B12 has its own extra wrinkle. A slower stomach can reduce how much of it your body actually absorbs from food over time. That's on top of you simply eating less of the foods that carry it. You don't need a supplement aisle to close most of that gap. A small can of sardines covers well over 3 times a full day's B12 in one sitting, plus a real dose of calcium alongside it. A cup of plain yogurt gets you most of the way to a day's B12 on its own. For vitamin D, a serving of salmon a couple of times a week and a few minutes of sunlight on your skin cover more ground than most people expect. Iron and magnesium can lean on the same short list of foods doing double duty. Beans and leafy greens for iron. The nuts and seeds already showing up in the small assemblies from earlier for magnesium. This isn't 7 separate grocery lists stacked on top of each other. None of this replaces blood work. If your doctor already checks labs as part of managing your medication, ask that B12, vitamin D, and calcium ride along on the same draw. That way a gap gets caught early, instead of after it's already cost you something. If you're already eating the eggs, the yogurt, the occasional sardines, food has this one covered for most people. If blood work turns up a real gap even with that in place, that's a conversation for your doctor, not a guess from a supplement label. Muscle gets most of the attention on a list like this one. What about the frame it's sitting on? Number 7. Protect the bone underneath the muscle and know where the line is. One 2026 study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that older adults on these medications had roughly 11% higher fragility fracture risk compared with those on other diabetes drugs. That's worth knowing. It's also not the finished story. The study couldn't prove the medication caused it, rather than the weight loss itself, or something else entirely. Other research on these same drugs and bone health has found neutral or even protective effects. Bone research on these medications is genuinely still being sorted out. What the data shows this year may not be what it shows in 2 years. That's exactly why the food-first basics are worth doing, regardless of which way the research eventually settles. Treat it as a reason to cover the basics, not a reason to panic. Calcium and vitamin D, paired with the protein you're already working on, are what bone runs on. The same small assemblies from earlier already carry some of both: the cottage cheese and yogurt for calcium, salmon, or a little sunlight for vitamin D. Weight-bearing movement, like a daily walk, does the rest that food alone can't. A bad knee gives you a warning ache. A weak bone usually doesn't. The fracture from a fall is often the first sign, and by then, you're in an emergency room instead of a kitchen. One boundary matters more than any of the 7. None of this is a reason to skip a dose or change how you take this medication on your own. If nausea, vomiting, or appetite loss are severe enough that you can't get these 7 things right, no matter what you try, that's exactly what your prescribing doctor needs to hear about. It's not something to push through alone. Food can do a lot of this work. It was never going to be the part that manages your medication for you. 7 things. 1 kitchen you already have. Pick tonight's dinner and fix just one of them. If the plate's been running your protein last, move it first. If the water's been an afterthought, pour the first glass before you even start cooking. Do that one thing tonight, on purpose, and let the rest follow once it's actually a habit rather than something you're still relearning at every meal. If you want the full checklist with amounts and timing laid out on one page, the free action guide has it waiting for you in the description. You never have to scrub back through and take notes. Tell me in the comments which of these 7 habits you've already built without noticing, and which one still needs work.